Prostitution and its impact on women. If you listen to the mainstream media, it would be easy to think that prostitution, now rebranded as sex work, is a good career option for some women, with its flexible hours and easy money. And so you might think, decriminalising it makes sense. But when you think about what prostitution really is, it quickly becomes clear that things aren't that simple. Who better to remind us of the true nature of prostitution than Andrea Dworkin, who was herself involved in it as a young woman? She said, "I want to bring us back to basics. Prostitution. What is it? It is the use of a woman's body for sex by a man. He pays money. He does what he wants. The minute you move away from what it really is, you move away from prostitution into the world of ideas. You will feel better. You will have a better time. It is more fun. There is plenty to discuss, but you will be discussing ideas, not prostitution. Prostitution is not an idea. It is the mouth, the vagina, the rectum, penetrated usually by a penis, sometimes hands, sometimes objects, by one man, and then another, and then another, and then another, and then another. That's what it is. So not an ordinary job. There's been a lot of development since Dworkin wrote this in 1993. Not only has the industry expanded, but we now have lap dancing clubs in almost every city. Webcamming, Pornhub, and a multitude of similar porn sites, OnlyFans, and websites where men can browse catalogues of women and order one up to their flat or hotel room as if she were a pizza. Prostitution is now a massive industry that has been growing year on year for decades. According to the ONS, it contributed £6.3 billion to British GDP in 2023. And that doesn't include OnlyFans' $1.31 billion net revenue, or the porn and lap dancing empires. Meanwhile, in England and Wales, the police have more or less given up on enforcing the law against pimping, brothel keeping, curb crawling, and paying for sex with a child or an adult who has been coerced. All of these different forms of sexploitation present men with a picture of a multitude of interchangeable, mostly young women who are sexually available and willing, desperate even, to flatter them and fulfill their every sexual whim, no matter how violent or perverse. As such, the sex industry in all its forms feeds men's individual and collective sense of superiority and entitlement to sexual access to and control of women. These are known to be the very attitudes that are associated with male violence against women and girls. In other words, men who use prostitution and other forms of sexual exploitation are more likely to be violent towards women and girls in the general community. In one study, they were found to be 8 times more likely to rape women than other men. Is it any wonder, then, that in the past decade we have witnessed a huge increase in male violence against women and girls? When treating women as sexual commodities is so accepted and normalised, we should not be surprised that more than 50 men in a small French town thought nothing of accepting Dominique Pellicot's invitation to rape his unconscious wife. When the British police have almost totally given up on enforcing the law on pimping and child sexual exploitation, we should not be surprised that we have a grooming gang scandal. The normalisation of prostitution, the pornification of the culture, and the new forms of sexploitation, including OnlyFans, have simultaneously groomed girls to accept a life of objectification and service to men's needs, rather than their own. Signing up for OnlyFans is now only a small step from running an Instagram account. So we should not be surprised that increasing numbers of young women, like Lily Phillips, are engaged in ever more desperate stunts to sell their virginity or have sex with large numbers of men. We must join the dots and see how all these things are related. If, as a society, we continue to give the sexploitation industry free rein, or we go even further and fully decriminalise it, where will we end up? How many more lives must be ruined before we take action? So what's the solution? Many feminists support the Nordic model, also known as the equality model or abolitionist model, an approach to prostitution policy and legislation that has been adopted in Sweden, Norway, Iceland, Ireland and Israel. It is a human rights-based approach that recognises the prostitution system as part of the structural oppression of women and other marginalised groups, and as both a cause and a consequence of the persistent inequality between the sexes. It is the only approach that prioritises support, assistance to exit, and alternatives for those caught up in prostitution. Almost all surveys show that overwhelming majority are desperate to get out, while holding pimps and sex buyers to account. Specifically, the Nordic model decriminalises the selling of sex, provides those selling sex with high quality, non-judgmental support services, genuine routes out and alternatives, and expunges criminal records and prostitute cautions for soliciting to sell sex, strengthens laws against pimping, brothel keeping, prostitution advertising and human trafficking. It makes buying sex a criminal offence with a key aim of changing men's attitudes and behaviour. Must be accompanied by a whole raft of holistic measures, including a public information campaign, education in schools and colleges, training for the police and other frontline officials, and tackling the inequality and poverty that drive people into prostitution. What about decriminalisation? The alternative that is heavily promoted by a vocal and well-financed lobby for the expansion of the industry is full decriminalisation, or decrim. This involves the decriminalisation of all aspects of the prostitution industry, including pimping, brothel keeping and advertising. Prostitution is treated like any other business, and there is no public funding for services to help women exit the industry. This enshrines in law men's right to buy women for sex and third parties' right to profit from women's prostitution. This inevitably leads to more men buying sex more frequently and more pimps and brothel keepers wanting to cash in on all that extra money. It therefore always leads to a rapid expansion in the size of the industry and an increase in human trafficking. Full decriminalisation has been in force in New Zealand since 2003. It has not been the success that is often claimed. But isn't sex work just a normal job? When you scrape off the sugarcoating, many of the things we would expect in the workplace, like career progression, protection from sexual harassment and health and safety standards, simply do not exist in prostitution. If dentists have to wear masks, goggles and protective clothing just to look in your mouth, what kind of protection would you need to conform to health and safety standards when having full sexual intimacy with multiple strangers? Employers are required by law to protect employees from harm. Risks and harms of prostitution include infections, including gonorrhea, chlamydia, herpes, syphilis, hepatitis and HIV, some caused by microbes resistant to antibiotics, unwanted pregnancy. Injuries to the vagina, anus and rectum, including tears, abrasions, fissures and fistulas. Damage to abdominal and pelvic areas caused by mechanical trauma, including prolapse, incontinence, pain and infertility. Brain injury through strangulation and other acts of physical violence. Traumatic brain damage at levels comparable to boxers and victims of torture. Dissociation. PTSD incidence in the range of 47 to 68%, higher than in combat veterans. High rates of mental disorders correlating with high levels of violence from pimps and buyers. Women who have survived prostitution compiled the following job specification for prostitution. General tasks. Sexual activity with multiple male strangers, regardless of their age, appearance, attitude, health, or hygiene standards. Every orifice must be available. act degrading scenes from porn. Responsibilities. Never complain. Simulate pleasure. Be convincing. Do whatever the buyer wants, even if it hurts or disgusts you. The buyer is always right. Conform to unrealistic standards, even when pregnant or distressed. Abandon personal and health and safety boundaries to remain competitive. Career development. Typically downward as you get older, less desirable and less able to tolerate the abuse. Potential negative impact on future career and even the ability to work. Physical, emotional and spiritual damage. Social isolation. Substance abuse. Immediate boss. Brothel owner, human traffickers, escort agencies, pimps and every buyer. Desirable qualifications. As young as possible. A fuckable body. Vulnerability. Ability to dissociate. Lack of social support. A history of prior abuse, exploitation, self-harm, homelessness or being in care. Poor. Remuneration. Fluctuates due to deliberate over-recruitment by brothel owners, etc., leading to pressure to accept extreme porn-related demands from buyers. No pension, sick or holiday pay. Deductions. Large deductions to pimps, brothel owners, drivers and others offering protection whilst being the greatest source of danger or facilitators of it. High end only means higher overheads and outgoings to satisfy buyer expectations. Occupational hazards. Being urinated and defecated on. Being strangled, raped, tortured. Long-term disability due to repeated internal and external injury. PTSD and other enduring mental health challenges. Definitely not an ordinary job. This is why we reject the sex work and sex worker terminology. They are euphemisms that obscure the brutal reality of prostitution. For resources, we recommend the Nordic Model Now website at nordicmodelnow.org, which has a wealth of information, including survivor testimony, mythbusters and blogs. It also has a website shop that sells a variety of resources. All items are also available as free PDF downloads. If you enjoyed listening to this article, you can find this together with many more on the WRN blog Women's Words at womensrights.network/women's words. You can also subscribe to our podcasts at womensrights.network/WRN-podcast. Or if you'd like to join us, you can go to womensrights.network/join-WRN.